In this exciting episode, we find out that knowing the difference between chili and slop won't help you pay the bills when baby needs a new pair of braces. It's Season 2, Episode 7 of Perry Mason, The Case of the Married Moonlighter. Welcome to the Perry Pod. I'm your humble host, Jonathan Searcy, and my purpose here is pretty simple: provide an audio companion to the greatest legal drama in television history, Perry Mason. I plan to do a pod for every episode of the television series, and as time permits, I'll look at some of those made-for-TV movies too. I'll be working through the series in the order in which the episodes were aired. Each episode I'll give a brief refresher on the plot, and if the episode was based on a novel, I'll compare the book with its television adaptation. Next, I'll list some key pieces of trivia, as well as tackle the episode's main theme. We'll feature a Perry proverb, a moment of wisdom from the man himself, and then we'll finish with a post-case Watercooler, where just like Perry, Della, and Paul, we can rehash the ins and outs of their adventures. But first, to the law library! Each episode in the law library, we return to prior cases to refresh our memories about Perry's past, so we can find fresh precedents for future cases. In this episode, we see both Perry and Hamilton Berger worry about subpoenas.
We're not going to answer any more questions.
You mean at this time?
I mean at this time or any time.
I suggest you investigate the power of a subpoena. Good day, Miss Kennedy.
Your Honor, Mr. Hickey is a close friend of the defendant, and he has been from the outset most uncooperative.
Has he been subpoenaed?
He has, Your Honor. This witness is vital to our case.
The clerk will draw an order for the arrest of the witness, Luke Hickey, and produce him in court forthwith.
We've seen subpoenas deployed in the series before, perhaps never so contentiously as in The Case of the Sulky Girl, where it was our man Paul Drake on the receiving end of a legally binding piece of paper.
In case you never saw one of these before, that's a subpoena.
What's the idea?
Oh, just something that Mr. Berger and I thought up. Nobody would ever accuse you of being friendly to the DA's office. So we figured it might be more effective if you appeared as a witness for the state in the exact conditions test. After all, you did see the whole thing.
Now, wait a minute, Trag.
You could testify that Mr. Graves' eyesight was far above normal. That would mean a lot coming from you.
Berger would never call me.
He might.
In Perry, legal documents, however, are a dime a dozen. Look at what these cats are doing with marriage licenses. It's surprising that more people don't imitate Luke Hickey and take it on the lam when they get the subpoena from either Perry or the prosecution. Without further ado, let's get to the plot of this episode. The Case of the Married Moonlighter. Danny and Eileen Harrison are married with a daughter, but there's trouble. Repossessed appliances, mounting medical bills, Danny's run-in with his father-in-law, only hinted at, and the fact that brilliant boy Danny could apparently be working anywhere he wanted as an engineer, but chooses to eke out a meager wage as a teacher and midnight moonlighter at a diner. This does not bode well.
Eileen, honey, look, you don't know what you're saying.
Yes, I do, Danny. I don't mind scrimping for myself, but I won't let Carol suffer.
Honey, I promise you I'll take care of everything. I'll get the money somehow.
How?
I said I'd get it.
Eileen goes to Perry to get help. Perry gets out the checkbook. That's a quick fix that won't work either.
Danny could go to work tomorrow for almost any engineering firm in the country, but no. He's got to kill himself by holding down 2 jobs. He acts as though teaching were a holy calling.
I know a lot of doctors and lawyers who feel the same way.
Do their wives and children have to suffer for it?
One night, Danny's past catches up with him. even as it becomes clear he can't retain his job at Luke Hickey's diner. A former schoolmate walks in, gassed out of his mind, and he's critical of both Danny and the diner's food.
Danny, you were the smartest boy in the block. Smart one. Look at you now, slinging hash. What are you teaching at high school of yours? Cooking? How to succeed? That stuff is slop.
Would you like to order something else?
No, I want a bowl of chili. Not that slop.
The man's name, Frank Curran, and he's got some serious cash on him, which has got to be tempting to Danny. Danny seems like a good sort. He drives the drunken Frank home, and Frank doesn't puke in his car. Score! Then trundles him off to bed after a run-in with a neighbor. The next day, Danny's hanging around at home long enough to get nabbed for Frank Curran's murder. Just who was this guy Curran? Paul Drake gives us this obit.
Curran Frank, age 32, single, address 1417 Chetley, occupation vice president of Atlas Construction Company, which doesn't mean a thing. His old man's chairman of the board. Atlas is the company that made that new freeway near Whitlock. Close friends? None. Hobbies? Wine, women, and song.
Well, if Danny's not the murderer, then who is? We've got three suspects. There's Linda Kennedy, the woman who despises Frank Curran so much she wants to be his wife.
And yet, just a short time ago, you waited until 2 o'clock in the morning to ask Frank Curran to marry you.
That's right.
Were you in love with Frank Curran?
I loathed him. I thought he was the most despicable man that ever lived.
Thank you, Mrs. McCabe.
There's George Palmer, the wound-up next-door neighbor to Curran who lost $1,400 to the drunk Curran the night of the murder.
Why were you so wound up at this particular time?
Look, Mr. Mason, I came up here of my own free will to try to help.
And you have.
Well, all I've got to say is you've got a mighty strange way of showing your gratitude.
And then there's good old Luke Hickey, the man whose diner was in financial trouble and who had openly denied committing the crime earlier in the episode.
Did you murder Frank Curran?
No. Not that I've got scruples. I just didn't think of it.
Well, here at the episode's end, Luke's singing a different tune.
Just when he came out of his bedroom and saw me going through his pockets, he recognized me and he started to yell, "Hey, what do you think you're doing there? I'll fix you good." Then he came after me.
That's when you hit him with the bookend?
Yeah.
Cherchez la femme. Don't make me laugh, Luke. Also, Perry's not getting paid, so Paul's not getting paid either. Good times. Now, let's get trivial, shall we? Each episode in our trivia section, I give you 3 takeaways. A Paul is a subject worth investigating more. Adela is something about a particular actor or actress in the episode. And a Perry is something we learn about our intrepid hero. Our Paul this episode. Perry's key insight into the crime revolves around the fact that an ignition key and trunk key do different things.
By any chance, did you try the ignition key?
Yes, I did.
Did it work?
No, it wouldn't turn.
But it did fit the lock.
Perfectly.
So my Paul prompt for this episode, how long was this a thing? At what point could you buy a key that worked both ignition and open the trunk? That's my question. Wouldn't it be nice if both the trunk key and ignition key were the same key? When did that happen? Our Della this week concerns Arthur Franz. You might know him better as Danny Harrison.
Do you know what the doctor says? In a couple of years, that leg is going to be as good as new.
Franz was born in 1920 in New Jersey, the son of German immigrants. He served in World War II in the Air Force. He was actually shot down and served time in a prisoner of war camp in Romania. When he got back to America in the 1940s, he resumed an interest in acting and built up his acting chops on Broadway for a few years before moving west to Hollywood. He has a bunch of film appearances in B-grade sci-fi films. Probably the most famous one is Invasion of the Body Snatchers. He was also in The Caine Mutiny alongside Fred MacMurray and Humphrey Bogart. And the TV credits, Franz has tons of them. Name any staple 50s or 60s drama, and Franz probably appeared at least once. He has multiple appearances on Perry Mason, both as a defendant and a murderer. He's one of the few actors to appear in the original series and in the new Perry Mason series from the 1970s. He was married 4 times and died in 2006 from emphysema and heart disease. Our Perry this episode involves our intrepid hero's past romance.
I'd love to help, Eileen. If only because you were the first woman who ever proposed to me. It was on her father's farm in Oregon. She was 7 at the time.
I was not. I was 8.5, and you turned me down.
He probably thought you were too old for him.
Sure, Perry may say he decided not to marry Eileen because she was older. The truth, even as a young man, Perry knew marriage was a dangerous business, which leads us to this episode's theme, which is pride. Danny Harrison feels he's called to teach, but could he have predicted his sick child to labor away at your dream when your child is suffering with medical infirmities borders on selfishness? He won't ask his father-in-law for cash. His wife says it's because he's too proud.
I just can't think you'd be better off with a divorce. Now, you ought to see Danny's side.
I have. He has nothing but foolish pride.
Then let's take a look at the case of Luke Hickey, who gives Perry from the stand an explanation why it hurts so much to see Frank Kieran carrying around all that cash.
You saw my place. It's really a dump, but you don't know what it means. People on the street would say, "There goes Luke Hickey. He owns a restaurant." It was very important to me. Kinda, you know what I mean? Then when I couldn't meet my bills, I guess I just flipped. Then when I saw this crumb who probably never did an honest day's work in his whole life, I don't know, it just didn't seem right that he should have all this money and I should need it so bad.
Here, too, it was a matter of pride. Now, the final scene makes it clear that none of the episode's problems have been solved. Danny hasn't suddenly gotten a high-paying job as an engineer. We don't know what's going to happen with the kid, the marriage. It looks like it's back together, at least for a time, but we're not sure. Everybody is eating humble pie. There's no meals for Paul and Della. There's no payment for Perry or Paul.
The way I see it, Perry doesn't stand to make a dime in this case. After all, the Harrisons can't afford to pay him. So how can he afford to pay me?
That's a very good question, Paul. Come to think of it, I can't.
The only good thing I can say is at least they're not patting themselves on the back, aka being too proud for doing pro bono work. Keep that humility, Perry. It'll serve you well. Now it's time for a Perry proverb. Midway through the episode, Perry enters the office and has this wonderful exchange with Della.
Morning, Miss Street.
Good morning, Mr. Mason.
Nothing like starting the day on a note of formality, I always say.
You know, you really can't be too formal in speech or dress. I mean, we've seen Perry not in a suit in maybe a handful of scenes through 47 episodes. He likes to observe the basic proprieties. Good for you, Perry. Now, let's grab a swig from the water cooler.
Find out who bought it, where, and when.
Perry, won't this keep until morning?
You've plenty of time. I'll be back at the office in 1 hour. I'd like it then. Bye.
Our research prompt from the last episode involved scopolamine. It's the drug that the Strags used to dope Jack Hardesty in an effort to locate the hiding spot of the stolen money.
Will you please describe the nature of this scopolamine drug to the court?
Well, it submerges certain inhibitory areas of the brain without affecting other functions.
Might it be used as sort of a truth serum?
Yes, definitely in some cases. It leaves the memory, hearing, and powers of speech unimpaired. However, it's not as dependable as sodium pentothal.
Myra Caraway let me know that scopolamine is often used to combat motion sickness, but that on a recent cruise she went on, it was not encouraged, especially if you used it in combination with Dramamine, because the side effects of scopolamine are dangerous. I found an article from, I don't know if this is reputable or not, drugs.com, concerning devil's breath, a drug with Colombian origins that contains a chemical similar to scopolamine. Now, devil's breath is sort of the urban legend version of the drug, so what we have to go on, in point of fact, is scopolamine. The behind-the-ear transdermal patches that people use to prevent motion sickness contains a low dose of the drug, and that low dose absorbed through the skin usually prevents the drug's worst side effects. But if you have the drug with a drink, particularly alcohol, you'll wind up being confused, you'll have possible hallucinations, and then you'll have amnesia, which means you won't remember anything that went on after the drug took effect. The inhibitions it lowers do not appear to be such that it would work as a unlock the secret this person is holding drug. It is connected with spiritual rituals conducted by some South American tribes. All of this makes me wonder what venue the article on scopolamine in the episode actually appeared in. So what kind of medical rags is old Doc Blaine subscribing to? Was this in Scientific American or was this in National Enquirer? I'm not really sure. The drug has been a source for urban legends as well as real-life cases. As always, I'd love feedback about this particular episode or the podcast in general. Was there something about this episode that you'd like to comment on or something you'd like to correct? You can leave comments on the pod's website at theperrypod.libsyn.com or email me at theperrypod@gmail.com. You'll find those links in the show notes. All Perry Pod episodes are available via Spotify, YouTube, and iTunes. Thanks again for joining me on this pod journey. Join us next time as Perry goes Camptown racing in the case of the jilted jockey. Join me, won't you? Until then, this is Jonathan Searcy saying, keep on walking that Park Avenue beat!